Hi, I'm Pastor Nathan Decker with High Street United Methodist Church, and this is our first attempt at trying to do Bible studies through social media and through Facebook. I hope you'll enjoy this online Bible study as much as I will, and I hope you'll also take part in not just the videos part of it, but also the homework. That is, the email packets that we'll be glad to send out. If you don't have this email packet right now, contact us either through our website or by making a comment below this video with your email address, and I'll be glad to share with you the homework packet. Now, let's get to our study. We're going to be talking about 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Now, that is not the Gospel of John. Now, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Well, you might remember that. That's the Gospel of John. It's a large text, much more detail, and it's talking about the life of Jesus Christ. We're not going there. Instead, we're going to be talking about those little bitty tiny books that are at the end of the Bible. Right before you get to the book of Revelation, right after you have a whole bunch of Paul's letters, you end up with 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. They're so small, as a matter of fact, one of them only has 5 chapters. The other 2 don't even have chapters. They're tiny, they're itty-bitty, but they're filled with knowledge and wisdom and things that we as a people of faith today need to hear. Because they come from a time period in which the church was in the midst of turmoil, struggles within and without. There was troubles inside the church, as well as the persecution that was happening outside the church. Now, one thing we have to know, though, is that these are a particular kind of literature. In literature, we have different genres. In the books behind me, there's different genres. I've got my little New Testament section, and then I've also got an Old Testament section, and then I've got some histories over here, and some hymnals, and various places where different types of literature means different things. We call that genre. The genre that we're looking at within this particular aspect is a letter. A letter, especially with 2nd and 3rd John. 1st John, maybe not so much. The 2nd and 3rd John definitely fall into the category of a letter. And you all know what a letter is like. Well, maybe you don't, because in our digital world today, we send everything through emails and through posts and tweets and twits and all that other stuff. A letter is something you sent through the mail. It was meant to be received, and it was always hoped for that it would be good news. So you can imagine it this way. You can picture that we go back into ancient times and somehow open somebody else's mailbox and get their mail. That's what it's really like, is because this is a totally different letter than anything we've ever read. It wasn't written to us. It wasn't meant for us. It was not expected to fall into our hands and have us read it. But somehow, through the grace of God, it has, and through this letter, we get to learn from a community that was going through troubles and trials and tribulations, that was having internal strife. And because of the genre, we can understand that this was sent to someone else. This letter was not intended for our ears, for our eyes. This letter was not intended for me, and this is not my mailbox. Dear Mom, please send more of those wonderful, luscious chocolate chip cookies. Your lovely, hungry grandkids ate all of them. And they wouldn't share. Love, your son, Nathan. Oh, hey, I was writing a letter to my mom. You know, it's something that we don't do anymore is take the time to sit down and write letters. But in the ancient world, they wrote letters all the time. And in fact, in the ancient world, they followed a specific way of writing letters, the same way that we really do too. You notice that I started with Dear Mom. We call that, a salutation, a way of saying, hello, hi, this is a letter, and I'm writing it to you. And then we have the other part of the letter. It's called the body. And that's where we talk about exactly what we wrote this letter for, the whole purpose for the letter, the whole meaning that the letter has. All of the good stuff is found within the body. Lastly, in our kind of letters that we used to write, we would also have a nice closing where it was always sincerely, cordially, in deepest respect, or in honor, or as I put it for my mom, love. and then we would sign it. We'd tell who sent the letter. Now, in the ancient world, especially as you find it in 2nd and 3rd John, when you look at these texts, you're going to find there are 4 parts. It's very similar to the 4 parts that I just described in a modern-day letter, but these 4 parts are found in all ancient letters. You can find them in all those town names that you find where Paul wrote letters to the Romans and to Rome, and the Christians at Corinth, Corinthians, the Christians at Ephesus, Ephesians, Philippians, Philippi, Thessalonians, Thessalonica. All of those are letters. 2nd and 3rd John are just like those. They're of that same genre, and as that, they have those 4 distinct parts. Now, we start our letters with the salutation, and then we tell who the letter's to, and we wait until the very end to let you know who sent this letter. Well, in the ancient world, they didn't do that. They included all of that information in the very beginning, and we called it a greeting. So in this letter, you'll find, in these 2 letters, 2nd and 3rd John specifically, you'll find the author of the letter mentioning who he is, as well as telling who he is writing the letter to. Find that now within your text. Now, when you find that, you'll also notice that following the greeting is the second part. Always within the letter is the second part of this letter in the ancient world. And the second part is when the author of the letter gives thanks. That is, a thanksgiving prayer. They give thanks for all the ways that you are this, or all the wonderful things you've done, or all the wonderful ways that you exemplify from God this. In this particular letter, there's some really big hints. Like most ancient letter writers, the writers of these 2 letters have hints about what their main topic is inside of their Thanksgiving prayer. Now, the Apostle Paul, in his writing, was an expert at this. He was really sly in that he would often give thanks for all the things that he was about to talk about in the body. In other words, he'd say, "Thank you so much for all the wonderful ways that you're faithful." And in the body of the letter, he would say, "And by the way, you're not being very faithful." Now, the writer of 2nd John does this very same thing. He emphasizes within his prayer of thanksgiving, truth. Truth. It's repeated many, many times in the Thanksgiving and in the greeting of the letter. He's emphasizing that he is coming from the part of the church that is preaching the truth. Now, that automatically tells you that you can infer that then somebody is not participating in the truth. Somebody's out there giving a different gospel, a different form of Jesus, a different way of understanding God. And this writer wants to make sure that the hearers of this letter know who is the truth, know the truth of the gospel, and also know that he is writing from the truth. Now, when you look at that, the greeting and the thanksgiving, the next section of the letter is the body, where he's going to put in this letter exactly what he's trying to say, exactly what he wants to say to the community, in all those wonderful ways that he wants to emphasize to the community that this is the truth, this is the importance. Now, we'll look at that in a second. But think about this from the perspective of a letter that we write today. Do we give thanks for people? Do we often begin our emails with "Dear so-and-so," or do we just rush right into the body and not take time to say thank you? I'm not very good at it, but I try, especially with volunteers and the staff here at High Street, to begin my letters by saying some way of saying thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you've done. Thank you for the wonderful ways that you provide for our church, that you sacrifice for our church, that you give to our church. It's a good idea to stop and say thank you and position ourselves from that place of thank you, not to be sly like Paul necessarily, but to offer some form of honest, true, humble thanks. Thanks to God for you. Now, the last part of all the letters is the same as our letter, in a closing. Now, usually Paul would say, say hello to such and such and such and such, and he'd drop a whole bunch of names. In these letters, they don't do that. Instead, their main concern is who is there within the congregation itself. They're worried about these congregations, and so they part with closing words to offer advice, and in their closing, they lift up the church to be pure and holy. That's saying something about this tension within this community. That's saying something about the tension that we have in our community of faith. Amen? Now, one of the things about a letter is that a letter always has a sender. That is, somebody's the one who wrote this letter. Now, with John, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and even the book of Revelation, all of these characters, through tradition, are attributed to somebody named John. Now, whether or not they're the exact same John, I don't know. Nobody knows. If you had a time machine, you might be able to figure it out. But for our purposes, let's just say that the writer of the letter comes from the same community as everybody else within that type of literature. These books that are given the names John or given the name Revelation all come from the same community. And it's the same community that is dealing with the same problems, the same issues. Now, one of the things about that, and Richard Hayes does a beautiful job of saying it, he says, fortunately for us, this letter was preserved, widely circulated, and ultimately canonized as a part of the New Testament. That is, ultimately they put it within the Bible. Thus, we are given the privilege of a glimpse at one particular tension-filled moment in the life of the first generation of Christians, ever to have a faith within this movement. We're given a privileged glimpse at what's happening inside the lives of these people. And that glimpse shares with us not just who we are as a people of faith who have inherited this faith, but also guides us as a people of faith. Because we know now, because we it's not like we haven't had fights inside the church before, is it? I mean, we feel like today maybe that it's so horrible. There's so much fighting inside the church. Well, the reality is, that's kind of normal, and it's really been happening for a long, long time. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. Now, I like to sing that song. My churches know that I really love to sing that song, especially after a committee meeting. I like it to be a habit that we gather, and after we've done the business of the Lord, that we close in that moment of worship when we say, this is something we can all get along with. This is something we'll agree to. Now, that's not always easy. Sometimes when we're having business meetings at church, sometimes we're not necessarily united very well, and sometimes we're not of the same one mind. But that's not unnatural for the church. When you look at this text, in 2 John in particular, and in 3 John following it, we'll talk about, the church was experiencing these kinds of turmoils. Now, the beginning of the writing of the 2 John says, the elder to the elect and her children. Well, there's not even a name there. It's just an elder. Well, just an elder means just somebody who's been set aside, ordained, and has the power and the authority of the church invested in them. This is a person that's trusted to do communion, to do baptisms. This is somebody who's trusted to lead the church in worship and in order. Now, to the elect lady and her children, to the called lady and her children. That can be a lot of things. When you think about the phrasing here, that can mean the lady as far as being a church, because oftentimes within the New Testament, the church is viewed as a bride, the bride of Christ. Or this actually could literally be a woman who literally has a church meeting in her house. This could also be, really for us, an understanding of what we're supposed to be. The called people and her children. The one who's called. The one who's called out, the church, ecclesia. This is the Greek word that means those who have been called out of the synagogues as Jews, called out of the world as a people who are meant to be holy as God is holy. When you look at that and see it, it could be deep symbolism where this is not just a lady who's housing a church in her house and those are her children, but this is the church. The church. And we are the children of faith. Now, when you keep reading on there, you go into that wonderful Thanksgiving prayer, and several times there's this word that's mentioned, this word that's come up oftentimes. Let's see if you hear it. To the elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth. And not only I, but also those who know the truth. Because of the truth that abides in us all will be with us forever. Grace and mercy and peace be with you, with us from God the Father and Jesus Christ and the Father's Son, in truth and love. I was overjoyed to find that some of your children were walking in the truth. Do you see where we're going here? This writer is really concerned about the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But more than that, there's an emphasis on what kind of truth. He writes to them, and he's concerned that this congregation needs to know what is the truth. Now, that means that there's somebody somewhere who's not sharing the truth. What is the truth? And what is it that the writer of 2 John wants the church to do with the truth? The writer wants the church to abide in the truth and to avoid those who aren't claiming the truth, who aren't preaching the truth, who aren't proclaiming Christ's truth. In fact, the author of this text, if you keep reading, even calls these folks a name that strikes fear in the heart and lives of all of the community of John. He calls them antichrists. Notice I said antichrists, plural, more than one. We're not talking about some end-time leader who's going to take over our nation or some other nation and conquer the world in unity and drag us all to hell. No, this is more than one. And when you think about that word, antichrists, what that really means is it's anyone who's opposed to Jesus Christ. Anyone who's opposed to Christ, against Christ, standing in the way of Christ. Now, what is the teaching that the elder speaks of? We have to keep reading to find that. But now, dear lady, I ask you, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but one you have had from the beginning, let us love one another. This is a commandment that Jesus speaks in the Gospel of John. It's repeated several times in not just 2 John here, but also in 3 John and 1 John. That the most important commandment for this community is to share in that love. Now, love in the New Testament has a special word. We say love all the time. I love my wife's cooking. I love my mom's cookies. We love all kinds of things. But this love is agape love, a selfless love, a love that is not like our desire or passion for food or sex or relationships. This is a selfless, charity-giving love, a love that's much different than what we normally think of when we say love. We could say, I love fish, and then you go and you catch a fish, and you pull it up and you cut it and you cook it, and you say you love fish. No, you don't love fish. You love what the fish can do for you. You love eating the fish. It's not very loving, especially not from an agape perspective. Agape is this understanding of giving of self and of being together. Now, a part of me, I have to understand who I am to be a part of a group. I can't deceive myself into believing that I'm the smartest one in the group, nor can I deceive myself in believing that I have all the right answers in this group. Instead, to be a part of a group means that I have to give up some things that I usually hold dear to myself. And that's a part of that agape love, a sharing of self and a being selfless in that sharing. Not living inside of a box that deceives us of who we are and who we can see other people to be, but living in a world in which we see others the same way Christ sees them. Seeing the world through Jesus' eyes, loving one another. And this love, the writer continues in verse 6, that we walk according to his commandments. Love is not just simply saying, I love you, and moving on. Love is also obeying the commandments. This is the commandment, just as you heard it from the beginning. You must walk in it. The author is very concerned that we walk within love. We take time in love. And then he mentions those that are opposed to this. Many deceivers have gone into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is a deceiver and the Antichrist. Now, he just told you what the lie is. Those who aren't sharing the truth, instead they're sharing a different kind of gospel. They're sharing a gospel that emphasizes this idea that Jesus did not come in the flesh. Now, for us in today's world, that sounds so ludicrous. We think of Jesus as being totally human and totally God. What we don't understand is that the church didn't always sit there. It took us over 500 years of fighting inside and among ourselves to get to the point where we realized that Jesus was fully human and fully divine. That this gift from God and the Messiah was not just a ghost, but was touchable. Now, in the early church, when they talk about that, what they're experiencing is a group called the Gnostics. Gnosticism was a belief that held that Jesus was one who brought knowledge from above that would free us. And a real big tenet in Gnosticism was the idea that anything that came from this world had to be sinful inherently, and therefore nothing good could come from it. Now, every now and then I hear hints of that in Christianity, where I hear things like this world is damned to hell, or this world is not going to amount to anything. It'll be tossed into the trash heap that is the fiery lake. No, God will save this world. God will renew this world. And one of the big places that God shows that is by sending Jesus Christ in the flesh. Just like you and I, Jesus had to eat. Just like you and I, Mary had to change Jesus' diapers. Think on that one for a little bit. Just like you and I, Jesus had to go through life and kind of try to figure out, what does it mean to be me? What does it mean to ask these questions, to sort through, to be limited in knowledge and understanding? Human. Jesus is the only one who we could ever say was perfectly human. Now, there are those who might say, he was part human at some times, like when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, that was a human moment. No, you can't handpick that Jesus was human here and then divine there. He was always human and always divine. And a part of that with Gnosticism is this notion that the world doesn't have anything good within it. But if you go back to Genesis, when God created the world was good. And even after we broke it with Adam and Eve and the apple and the snake and all that fun stuff, God still sees good within us. Good inside the world. Broken good, but still good. Good that can be revealed, good that can be resurrected, good that can come in the flesh. Jesus in the flesh shows us that we have that potential through the power of Christ. We have that ability through God to move forward in this world to be good and loving. But it takes God. It takes the truth of admitting that Jesus came in the flesh. Not as a spirit, not as a ghost. There's all those weird passages in the Gospel of John where you get Jesus appearing in the middle of a room out of thin air, and the Gnostics are like, yay, that's our Jesus. He's a ghost. But then you have those other places. Places where Jesus sat down and ate, had a fish fry by the lake. There are places that Jesus broke bread with the disciples. The Gnostics don't like those, because that implies that Jesus is physical, Jesus is human, and that when we die, our soul, our body, our spirit, our essence, all that is us gets redeemed, gets resurrected, gets renewed. That is the truth that 2 John, the elder in 2 John, is writing. Now, when you look at this, continuing reading, those antichrists are really up to no good. Be on your guard, so that you will not lose what we have worked for, but will receive a full reward. Everyone who is not able to abide in the teaching of Christ, who goes beyond it, does not have God. In other words, see, what he's saying here is that if you go beyond the teaching, if you go somewhere and you get lost in the teaching, you're finding yourself, you're missing out. But whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. Now, there was another group in the ancient world that was struggling with becoming Christian. There was a group, the ancient Jews were having difficulties with this. Now, it's not all of them, but it was some who had left the synagogue with Paul and who were going and becoming a people of faith in this new thing called church. Now, a big leap that they would have had to have eventually come to was the notion that God and the Son were one. We have this wonderful developed Trinity that I don't understand, and I haven't got a good understanding yet. I'm still trying. But I do understand at least this part, that God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit are all together God. Now, that's easy for me. Somebody's already packaged it up and fed it to me, and I can eat it and digest it, and it's easy. In the ancient world, They hadn't got there yet. They were fighting and trying and struggling. They were sorting it out. And so what the writer's saying here is that there are those who have only the Father, and by only having the Father, they're lacking. But for those who abide in the teaching have both the Father and the Son. He warns us, do not receive into your house or welcome anyone who comes to you and does not bring this teaching. For to welcome is to participate in the evil deeds of such a person. Now, that's a dangerous place to be. When you feel that you have the truth, the whole truth, and you're not allowing anybody else into the discussion, it's a dangerous place to be. But just as dangerous is also to be so open-minded that you lose your mind. Somewhere in the middle is where we as Christians are called to be. I think Jesus said it best when he said that we were to be gentle as doves and wise as serpents. Because we have to be understanding that, not everything in the world's going to be easy to understand, and not everything in the world is going to be the truth that Christ is presenting to us. Keep reading, and he goes, although I have much to write you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk to you face to face so that our joy may be complete. Now that phrase, our joy may be complete, seems to be a catchphrase for the community of John, something that they always hope for. And how they hope for it is to always be together in koinonia. Koinonia is a wonderful Greek word. It means fellowship, but not like we think of fellowship. When I say fellowship at my church, somebody's getting ready to cook a potluck dinner. There's going to be some casseroles. No, fellowship is much deeper than that. Fellowship here is a deep abiding in love with one another. And this community values that so deeply, to be in fellowship with one another, so much that the writer, he can't put it on pen and ink what he really, really wants to say to this community. He's just going to come in person and do it there. And finally, he has the closing. The children of your elect sister send their greetings. Another hint, if you ask me, that this is a church writing to another church. That this elect lady, this church, and her elder are writing to another church, guiding and helping lead them. That's the letter of 2 John, unpacked just a little bit. John Wesley, writing about the letter of 3 John, says this: grace takes away guilt, mercy, misery. Peace implies the abiding in grace and mercy, and in this concludes the testimony that God's Spirit, both that we are His children and that all our ways are acceptable to Him. This is the very foretaste of heaven itself, where it is perfected in the truth and in love. We as Christians are supposed to seek that. That really a wonderful understanding of living between being harshly dedicated to the truth and mercifully and gracefully sharing in love. Now, one of the things I see in the modern day church, personally, is that the church seems to be going in two different directions at the same time. You have Christians who are all about the love and almost in some kind of 1960s hippie way. Everything's love and everything's wonderful and there's no judgment, there's nothing, and grace is cheap. There's no reason for it. It's wonderful to think and feel this idea of everybody's in love and everybody's accepted, but there also has to be some accountability. Now that's the other dangerous place that I see the church going. Some churches are heading deep into such treacherous accountability where they out-Pharisee the Pharisees, who were never really fair, you see. It's kind of crazy because we seem to create such strict structures and rules that squeeze out the life of our institutions and out of our traditions and our wonderful gift in the Bible. We make it to where every interpretation has to be boiled down to one single interpretation. And we make it to where every single thing has to be only one understanding. Now, this is not liberal versus fundamentalist or conservative. This is actually having it to where only one view is the view. Instead of seeing that God can speak a variety of ways, through a variety of voices, and through a variety of understandings. Does the church have to be the same everywhere? Do we have to have the same understanding of culture and the same understanding of the way we are everywhere? Well, my friends, when I read the Bible, and especially within letters of the Bible, it's interesting because we used to have this big movement in the 1980s and 1990s to go and start New Testament churches, and one missionary I ran into joked and said, which one you want to be? Because they all had problems. Corinth had its problems. Galatia had their problems. Thessalonica had her problems. Which one do you want to be? Because all the churches had problems. All of the places within the Bible. And every one of these, well, for the most part, 66 books inside the Bible, represents a unique time and a unique culture within the life of the church. It's not like you can say, this is what God says, and He's always said this about everything. There's very few things that fall in that category. Yes, you could say that God is honestly, continually trying to love us. Yes, you can say that God's love is a love that chases after us and doesn't give up on us. But you can also say that God is one who, because of this love, expects us to love in a certain way, expects us to reflect that love into the world passionately, aggressively, in the way that we choose to live our lives, in the way that we choose to be human. Now in 3 John, that's exactly what has happened. He writes, and he's still very concerned, the elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. At first you might think, well, it's the same elder. He says the elder both times. Well, the tragic truth is that everybody could have said they were an elder. Well, not everybody, but all the elders could use that. In the United Methodist Church tradition, the majority of ordained people are elders. I'm an elder. We have deacons as well, but there's a lot of elders. All the pastors who are ordained to be elders. So we could all write a letter and say, the elder to the church. The reality is that we don't know if this is the same guy or if it's the same community even. We do know who he's sending it to Gaius. Unfortunately, we don't know too much about him. Is he another elder within another church? Is he also someone else who's having the same difficulties as the previous letter? Well, if you keep reading, we can see some things that are a lot in common. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, because I love you in the truth, that all may go well with you in good health, just as it is with you and well in your soul. I was overjoyed when some friends arrived testifying to your faithfulness to the truth, namely how you walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than this, to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Same emphasis, same kind of lingo. It's a good bet that this actually could be the same person, but we don't know for sure. It also could be, this is just to throw a really ham bone into it, that this is a letter written by the opposition, writing and opposing to the other letter, saying that, you said you had the truth, we do too. Isn't that how it is? That ain't in politics, yeah, he says I said this, but do you know what he said? It's crazy how we in the world often lose the truth because we boil it down to simple bumper sticker sayings and simple words. Recently the catchphrase, anything you don't agree with and anything you don't want to believe is just to call it fake. Fake news, fake posts, fake this, fake that. Well, somewhere we've got to get to the truth. Some things are facts, but for me, I'll tell you this, truth is greater than a fact. All stories are true. All stories are true. Whether you want to compare Job and Jonah and Jeremiah to Hansel and Gretel and the Little Red Riding Hood, they all contain truth. Some of them actually happened. Some of them are actually factual. And that's what I mean when I say that truth is greater than a fact. Truth carries within it something really deeper than just a historical notion that this is what happened and these are the order of events. Truth is beautiful. Truth gives life and breath to something new. This writer is concerned about truth. Beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the friends. Even though they are strangers to you, they have testified of your love before the church. You will do well to send them on in the manner worthy to God, for they began their journey for the sake of Christ, accepting no support from non-believers. Therefore, we ought to support such people, so that they may come as co-workers in the truth. It's a beautiful notion, this idea that fellow travelers came and they weren't treated like strangers, even though you didn't know them. You welcomed them with hospitality. For the early church and for the community of the John traditions, hospitality and fellowship was extremely important. That idea of koinonia ran deep into this notion. I said it didn't have a lot to do with potluck dinners. Maybe it really does. And that when we have a covered dish dinner, it doesn't matter who comes, but we welcome their dish, we put it on the table. Hopefully we don't hide it in the kitchen, but we put it out on the table, and we say it's part of everybody else's good cooking. And let the aromas and the smells all blend together so that we can experience this joyous thing called fellowship, koinonia, being one together, our joy complete. This church welcomed folks. This church experienced hospitality as a spiritual gift. He continues, though, in the body, saying, I have written something to the church, by Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So, if I come, I will call attention to what he is doing in spreading false charges against us. In other words, this fellow Diotrephes, or however you want to say his name, because we don't know how they pronounced it back then, he was saying something about the elder and about the elder's belief system. And the elder doesn't believe it's been fairly heard. He doesn't believe that his case has been fairly brought up to the church. And not the content of what those charges, he refuses to welcome the friends, and even prevents those who want to do so, expelling them from the church. Now you notice what he did there. He told us in the beginning, I'm so glad you're such a hospitable place. You welcome people so wonderfully. Except for this guy named Diotrephes. He's not welcoming anybody. In fact, if they don't believe exactly as he believes, if they don't teach exactly as he teaches, he doesn't admit them into the church. And not only that, but if anybody within the church wants to welcome them, well, he kicks those folks out too. It's a dangerous pattern, isn't it? When I believe so hard within my truth, my understanding of the way things are, that I'm not going to let anybody else be a part of the group, that I'm not going to let anyone else come in and show a different side of things, a different perspective. If I start believing that I know all I need to know about God, I have placed myself in a box. And not only that, I have placed my belief system, my understanding, and my ability to experience God in that same box. We do this often. We do it when we limit our ways of understanding God and when we limit our ways of hearing God speak. A lot of times the church falls into the trap of saying a formula, and this is the way to hear God. This is the way to interpret scriptures. We in the Western church sometimes get way too academic when it comes to this. We really truly do love our scientific method and our formula of using that. But in faith is nothing against science and faith together. Nothing against that. But faith goes deeper than science ever can. Faith is about stories. Faith is about experiences. Faith is about sharing, and sharing in such a way as to experience things beautifully from God, from heaven, from the truth. It used to be a joke that I heard that if you get, 4 rabbis in a room, you end up with 13 opinions. It's true for Methodist ministers too, by the way. It's true for all of us. Is that we come from different perspectives, different understandings, and different ways of being. Now, all of that comes together. Somehow, all of that collectively in the fellowship becomes what we would call God speaking the truth. God speaking the truth wholly through us. When I go on my own, I can experience God. I can go out in the woods. I can go hunting. I can go fishing. I love being out there in the middle of nowhere, just me and God. But there's a big risk there. And a part of the big risk there is that I, all by myself, can't hear God fully. I need my brothers and sisters. I need to welcome the strangers who have different opinions, who come from different places than I. I've never learned anything from somebody that I agree completely with. I learn a lot from people I disagree with. I learn a lot from people who come from different experiences and different patterns of ways of being. I learn a lot from people who have been there longer than I have. This writer seems to be saying the exact same thing. To invite and to welcome is good. But he gives a warning as well. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but imitate what is good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Everyone who has testified favorably about Demetrius and has the truth itself, we also testify for him, and we know that our testimony is true. While he's kind of putting down Diotrephes' behavior, he lifts up this other fellow, Demetrius' behavior. I have much to write to you, but would rather again not write with pen and ink. Instead, I hope to see you soon, and we'll talk together face to face. Peace be with you. The friends send you their greetings. Greet the friends there, each by name. In this closing, the writer seems to really believe deeply with this idea that you can see people who are of God and you can see people who aren't of God. And that's a very good illustration for us as the church. When we imitate God, it's easy to see that we're imitating God. And when we're not imitating God, it's very easy to see that we're not imitating God. And you don't have to go too far to find that. You can find it on the internet. You can find it in places on TV. You can find it every time we end up in the news, it seems. The only time the news wants to broadcast anything about the church is often the negatives, when we're not acting like we say we're supposed to act. Imitating God is an act of holiness. It's an act of reflection of God's grace. God shining God's light from heaven above and bringing it down to earth below. That's a powerful image for us, one that we need to receive and have. Now that's 2nd and 3rd John. Short little letters that were written from someone to someone else. In your homework packet, I hope you'll have some time to go through these questions and think about where we were at and what was going on. There's some wonderful also activities. One's called multisensory activity. And the multisensory activity, my hope is that you'll take a picture of artwork that you've made and share it with the rest of us in this group through the hashtag. I've offered a hashtag there so we can do that. And a hashtag, by the way, is just a £, for those of you who are like me, a little old. Then there's another one about going deeper in an activity and as a homework activity, and that's where I'd like you to take the ancient form letter, the ancient way of writing a letter, and imagine that you are writing that letter to the church, your church. What would you say? What would you give thanks to God for? What would you warn them? What would be in the body that would be your greatest concern? And how would you close it? Could you, like this writer, offer peace? Or would you be a little bit more strict? Have fun with your exercises, and I hope you'll have fun sharing, and I hope you'll join us with our next online Bible study next week. Take care, my friends, and God bless.